Dr. Richard Miller. So good to have you here. Richard, where are you today?
Oh, thank you. I'm in a little fishing village called Fort Bragg, which is on the Pacific coast, 3 hours northwest of San Francisco, in a county called Mendocino County, which is famous around the world for growing marijuana. It's part of something called the Emerald Triangle.
Ah,
It used to be famous for logging and fishing, but they overdid both of those endeavors. And then it became marijuana. And now marijuana is sort of phasing out somewhat. And it's a little tourist town, 7,500 people. It's tiny.
I bet it's lovely. Tell me, what have you been up to, Richard? What have you been working on?
I'm working in 3 areas right now, David. I continue my private practice because I can do it on Zoom. Since the pandemic, psychotherapy became a Zoom endeavor, which is really very freeing because it means I can be other places than my office and still conduct my work. So that is really very lovely. I'm continuing with my what I call internet radio program. It's a podcast, actually, like yours. But since I came from radio, I was 15 years on a national public radio affiliate. I try to integrate some of the radio procedures with my podcast. So I call it internet radio. It's called Mind, Body, Health, and Politics. I do something similar to you. I interview people. I focus pretty much on authors and scientists, and I've done a great deal of work on psychedelic medicine and human sexuality. So that's the second thing I do. And then the third thing I do is I write books. And I've got 3 books out on psychedelic medicine. One's called Psychedelic Medicine, one's called Psychedelic Wisdom, and one's called Integral Psychedelic Psychotherapy. And then I've got another one coming out soon called Psychedelic Medicine at the End of Life, dealing with end-of-life anxiety, depression, and fear by using psychedelics. Those are the 3 things I do. I write books, I see patients, and I broadcast my internet radio program.
Tell me about what we were talking about.
Oh, I missed something. I completely forgot. Thank you. About a couple of months ago, I started a 4th thing. Funny that I forgot it because I'm so excited about it. I decided to take the most effective tools from my 64 years of practice experience and take these therapy tools and give them to the public as a gift of service without any fees. So I've been making little videos, and one of my staff, Joshua Ansaldo, has been posting them on social media. We're really excited because just in the last 4 or 5 weeks, one of the videos has been viewed by 2 million people, and the total of the videos have been viewed by almost 4 million people, which says to me that people are interested in real health tips, no BS, no fluffs, and not having to send in money and box tops, just straight stuff. I'm giving them straight stuff, and evidently they're liking it. So that's very gratifying.
Talk to me about emotional well-being and perhaps techniques for self-regulation.
Well, self-regulation, that's a great topic, David. Thank you for directing us towards that. Self-regulation may be the most critical tool or set of tools that a person needs to function gracefully in the world and deal with what we all have to deal with almost all the time. There are things that come at us, things that come from within us, vicissitudes, tragedies, love stories. Many experiences come at us, wide variety. And so our emotions are affected. And when our emotions are affected, our ability to think and act rationally is affected dramatically. The computer in our head, the reasoner, our major tool, it doesn't do too well, David, when it's being impacted by heavy emotion. And we need tools to regulate our emotions. And I went to college for 11 years. In 11 years, no one ever taught me how to regulate my emotions or give me tools on how to control my inner computer that we call the brain. And so, even after that many years of studying psychology, I still did not know how to be the boss of my brain. My brain still acted like the boss. And this is true for most people in the world. The mind generates ideas, for example. Most of us think we are subject to those ideas, that we don't have any choice about those ideas because the mind is generating them. But that is not the case. The reality is the mind is one of our tools. We are the boss of the mind. We get to tell the mind what to think. On its own, the mind will generate pictures for many of us on the inner screen. If we close our eyes, we may see those pictures. They may be stills or they may be motion pictures. The mind can generate conversations that we hear in our head. But what we are not taught, David, is that we are in charge of those conversations. Just because the mind generates them for us doesn't mean those are the ones that we have to listen to, or those are the ones we have to even select. But what the mind does is it takes everything it's ever heard and it'll generate stuff like a generating machine. And it'll make pictures of all kinds of things. And these thoughts and these pictures are subject to outside reality. So, for example, you get hooked on crime stories on television, and you start watching a lot of crime stories. What your mind will then do is start generating crime ideas in your head. You might start to think, oh, maybe my house is going to get broken into because you watched a lot of stories about housebreaking. Maybe there are bad people out there in my neighborhood who have guns, might shoot me because you're watching all these crime stories. But actually, the number of shootings in this country statistically is tiny. Your chance of getting shot is less than getting hit by electricity in a lightning bolt. But if you watch all that stuff, the mind will then generate it and you'll have to deal with it. If you watch programs on laying on a beach, the mind will start generating programs about laying on a beach because it's susceptible to the input. However, we don't have to be susceptible to the input. We can sit back in our chairs and direct the mind and tell it exactly what to think about and exactly what kind of pictures to play. So it does our bidding. So that is one of the self-regulation tools that is essential for living. I haven't talked about how to do it yet. All I've talked about so far is the working of the mind. Now, you want me to tell you how to do it, how to get the mind, how to do it. And of course I will, because I'm going to keep my word to give this information away free. And you're not paying me, and I'm not paying you, and there's no money involved, David. All right, here's how you do it. You have to put yourself in mind control school, Dr. Miller's mind control school. And here's how it works. You sit down in the morning at some point when you get up, and you spend 30 to 60 seconds, that's all, telling your mind what to think. Let's say, for example, I'll make an easy one for you. I'm going to sit down and for 30 seconds, I'm going to tell my mind to count numbers. And then I sit there and I listen. 1, 2, 3, 4, and my mind is counting numbers. By the time I get to 15, my mind might try to take me somewhere else. I got to come back to the numbers. I go to 26. My mind try to get me somewhere else. I come back to the numbers. For 30 to 60 seconds. If you want to go for 2 minutes, that's fine. I'm just saying 30 seconds. Telling your mind to count numbers. And you do that 5 or 6 times a day, every day of the week. And what you are doing is training your mind to take orders, just like you train your dog with a little treat. Sit, and you give him the treat. Sit, and you give him the treat. And over time, you say sit, he sits down, you give him the treat. The same with the mind. You tell it to count numbers, or you have something else you want it to do. You want it to picture blue in your head. You can just keep telling it to picture blue in your head for 30 seconds. You want to tell it to think of a beautiful beach for 30 seconds, a beautiful beach. You can pick your own topic, but what you want to do is keep repeating it until your mind catches on and starts doing it. 30 seconds, 5 times a day, every day. Do it for a couple of weeks. Then switch topics to another topic. If you did numbers the first time, maybe you do the beach the second time. Maybe the third time you want to picture yourself swimming. Maybe the next time you want to picture yourself, if you're a person who is attracted to women, you want to picture yourself kissing a beautiful woman. The issue is not what you direct the mind to do. The issue is directing the mind to do something and repeating it for a short period of time so the exercise doesn't become oppressive. I'm not telling you to do something and you got to do it for an hour the first day or a half hour or even 15 minutes. Because 15 minutes, 5 times a day, you'd say, oh, Dr. Miller, that's too much. I can't handle it. Great. Handle 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds, 5 or 6 times a day, every day, and eventually you will be able to give your mind directions, and then you can move on to the next step in school. I'm not going to take you there today because it'll get a little too complicated. If you do that first step and keep it up for weeks, maybe months, maybe more than months, but I promise you that if you keep that little exercise going, you will gain the skill of directing your mind and making certain that your mind is your tool and not your boss. And believe me, everybody knows the mind wants to be the boss. It would love to be the boss. It would love to just keep generating stuff all the time and filling your mind with all kinds of stuff, some of which you like, some of which you don't like. But by taking control, you ensure that it's stuff that you do like. And then when you have the skill to direct it to what to do, when the mind generates something that you don't like some nasty self-criticism, some self-put-down, some reminder of something you did that you failed instead of succeeded, when the mind dredges up some of that cesspool, you know just how to go in and change the channel to something that you do want, something grateful instead of critical, something successful instead of failure, something pleasant instead of unpleasant, some beautiful thing rather than some ugly thing, some sustaining, nourishing, warm, huggy thing rather than some ugly, constricting, painful experience that just ruins your now because of something that happened in the past. And you can see, and I can see by the smile on your face, that you appreciate the connection that I'm now making between this mind control and dealing with the past. We're going to talk about that at another time because I'm going to go to the second critical tool, unless you want me to talk more about the first tool, which is mind control.
First, I want to ask you, who's talking to the mind?
Good question. Each of us knows that we are more than our mind. David, when you take a hair off your head and you touch it to your toe, you feel it immediately. It's quite remarkable. If you take a hair and touch a horse, 2,000-pound horse, on the rump, he feels it or she feels it. That is part of the electrical sensing system. The emotional sensing system is equally sensitive. The entire organism feels all the emotions, but the entire organism doesn't think. The thinking comes from the brain. The brain generates the ideas and the pictures and the videos. The emotions are part of the entire system. The us that I'm talking about, that's separate, as you put it, David, is the us that is the sum total of the computer's thinking, the electrical system's sensing, and the emotions feeling. All of that combined, and then some, makes up what psychologists call consciousness, and what the more religious, perhaps, people call spirit, the spirit of the person. We call it the consciousness of the person. And it's what Robert Heinlein, the author who wrote Stranger in a Strange Land, which I recommend highly to your listeners, he called it the grokker, Grokker. And when you know something at the total level of your being, the sum total of the brain, the emotions, and the sensing system, that is when you grok it. And that is what he considered to be the deepest form of knowing. And that is the best way I can answer your question. Taking control of this one particular tool that we call the mind, which generates ideas and pictures, is essential for graceful living. Otherwise, we can easily suffer from the consequences of some of the dark things that the mind is capable of producing. Heavy self-criticism, for example, can do a person in. It can make a person depressed to the point of not getting out of bed, wreak havoc. Now, the other thing that the mind is capable of doing on the dark side is creating such emotional unpleasantness that we experience something that we call anxiety. And anxiety is a terrible feeling for we human beings. It's like a vibration starting out in the chest most often and spreading then through the arms down to the stomach. And the vibration brings with it a sensation of imminent doom. Something bad is going to happen. And that's what we call anxiety. And anxiety is extremely different from fear. People confuse the two, but they're very different. Fear is a self-protective mechanism. Fear is extremely important. Fear is when you have a flat tire on the side of the road and you can hear a car in the distance, and because you can hear it, you make certain that none of your body is sticking out in the road to get hit by that car because you're a little afraid. Fear is when you see an animal in the woods and you get it out of there fast because you're afraid. That's fine. That's fear protecting the organism. Fear is when you see a big flame and you don't go near it because you'll get burned. That's a good thing. Anxiety, on the other hand, is a self-generated, unpleasant emotion which can ruin a beautiful day. And anxiety can be experienced even if you take a person and put them in a specially designed room, 3 feet thick cement all around. Nothing can happen to them. Special air put in, water, food, bathroom, everything they need, and they can still generate anxiety as if something bad is going to happen, even though they're totally protected and nothing bad can happen, because their mind can say something to them like, oh, maybe the oxygen is going to break. Maybe the cement on those walls will cave in on me. Maybe the water won't come through and I'll die of any kind of future threat. The mind can do that, especially when we're not telling it what to do. And then we can get anxious in that room, and we've self-generated anxiety, and we feel terrible. Now, the fastest way to deal with that anxiety, and we're getting back to your original question about tools for self-regulation. The first one is the mind control, and I gave a technique for how to start practicing mind control that will be successful over time, and it won't cost any money. The tool for dealing with emotional upheaval is another very simple one, but another one that takes a lot of practice. It's called abdominal breathing or diaphragmatic breathing. It's a way of breathing from the abdomen, small breaths, not big ones to go and get the system all excited, but small breaths which regulate the oxygen supply. When we get anxious and suffer real anxiety, we tend to hold our breath, we tend to gasp, we tend to tighten up our stomach, and we then make the oxygen supply erratic. Oxygen is our basic food. Everything about us is about oxygen. We bring oxygen into our body. It comes into the lungs. The heart, it was a nice pump, just like a pump in a car, and the heart pumps blood, liquid blood, to the lungs. The lungs insert oxygen into that blood. We then have an oxygen supply in liquid. The heart then pumps that blood back to the heart, and from there, it pumps it all throughout the body so that all the arteries, the tubes that are carrying the blood around the body, they go in every direction. And then when they get to the edges, they go into little tiny tributaries, like a river and then a stream. We've got an artery and then a capillary. And all those little capillaries fill with oxygen. And the whole system says, thank you for our food. Thank you for this great meal. But if we cut off that great meal, if we tighten up our muscles, if we press down on those capillaries, if we make it difficult for the body to get oxygen, we will increase our anxiety and will be even more upset and unhappy. And so the tool is to make certain that the oxygen supply is regulated. And the way to do that is with diaphragmatic or abdominal breathing. And the way, which I didn't learn in 11 years of college and graduate school and all my degrees, including my doctorate, I was never taught how to regulate anxiety. I learned all these techniques for working with patients, for dealing with their anxiety. But I was never taught the most direct technique, the mechanical technique, which is to regulate the oxygen supply. And so you regulate it with the breathing. And how do you do that if you weren't taught? Everybody says, oh, I know how to breathe. I know how to breathe. Yeah, everybody knows how to breathe unconsciously, meaning just let the system do its breathing. But everybody does not know how to breathe consciously. And conscious breathing is different from regular, normal, involutional breathing, which happens automatically. Conscious breathing means taking conscious control of the breathing in the same way that we talked about taking conscious control of the mind as a tool. We are now going to the breathing apparatus, and we're saying to the breathing apparatus, I am taking control of you as my tool, and I will temporarily direct you on how to breathe. And after I do that for a while, I'll relinquish control again, and you can take over for the minute-to-minute and day-to-day regular stuff. But in times of need, I am going to take control of your breathing apparatus, and I am going to make certain that all the little capillaries get plenty of oxygen so the whole system has regularity and homeostasis, which is the opposite of the jangle of anxiety, which gets us going up and down and vibrating inside, and which squeezes us off and tightens our muscles. And then we get into a loop of the muscles tightening down on the little tubes called arteries, and then the blood pressure goes up because there's pressure on those little tubes. And when the blood pressure goes up, the system gets into higher alert, and then the anxiety can go up even further, and we're in a loop, which some people then take into what is referred to in my profession as a panic attack. This is supercharged anxiety, a downright panic attack, where the person is hardly knowing what to do, and they can hardly control themselves, and they don't know which way to do and what to do and what, and they really scare the hell out of themselves. So much so that I had a patient who had a panic attack on an airplane, and they brought the plane down instead of going all the way because it was too much to deal with. But I can also tell you, David, that I have treated a person on an airplane flying from San Francisco to New York City. And I used the tool that I'm telling you about right now on that patient and cured them of an anxiety-producing flying phobia on that one flight. 5 hours from San Francisco to New York, we practiced every once in a while abdominal breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, and within a few hours, my patient was practicing it over and over again. And by the time we got to New York, the words I heard were, "I'm not going to have to hire you to fly back. I can handle it on my own." And the patient did handle it on their own and flew back successfully. Perfect word. We have agency. I love it. Agency over exactly what's happening in our mind and what's happening around us and how we react rather than respond.
So I think what we're talking about here is we have agency over our mind and over our reaction to things that may be happening around us.
Reaction is letting go of control. Responding is responding with control.
Right. So we may not be able to control what's going on around us, but we have, with practice, control over how we respond, react. Some people, they ruminate about the past. They think to themselves, oh, I could have done that better. And it might have been something that happened 5 minutes ago or something that happened 20 years ago. And there's a certain sort of rumination loop that people can get into. What are your thoughts on that?
That you're describing, David, is a very severe condition in some cases. In some cases, the person ruminates so much that it takes over their life. And in my profession, we call that obsessive compulsive disorder because the person is obsessed with ruminations and they spend so much time in their minds. You see, that's the extreme. And then on the other end are people who hardly do that at all. And then there's most people in the middle. That means that many people are dealing with exactly what you just described, David, which is from time to time having thoughts about material from the past. And a certain percentage of the time, the thoughts that people are having about material from the past is unpleasant or negative. No, another percentage of the time, it's pleasant and positive. But the unpleasant can be very unpleasant, number one. And number two, it can come at any time. So you could be sitting at a beautiful dinner or a nice event with friends and loved ones, and all of a sudden have what's called a thought intrusion, and some negative stuff comes into your head. Or you could be just driving your car and going somewhere, having a pleasant day, or driving to work and feeling fine. And then all of a sudden, one of these things you described, David, the rumination, comes into your mind. And it's enough to spoil your moment. And if it continues, you can get into an unpleasant mood and maybe stay in that mood because you don't yet know another tool, which we'll talk about. I don't know if we'll have time today, which is how to change your mood, because the moods also are ours to choose. Moods aren't put on us by the outside world or by some strange animal that lives inside of us. We generate our own moods, and so we can generate any mood we want. But getting back to your ruminations, which is what we're talking about, so you're driving along, and all of a sudden, you start thinking about some miserable experience or something you did where you're critical of yourself, and you start going over it and over it. That brings us back to tool number one, but possibly also more immediately, tool number two. And here's why, David. If you've already gotten so far down the line with these negative thoughts that you're starting to get anxious, you always want to deal with the feelings first, because feelings are dominant. So the first thing you do if you're getting anxious is to use the skills that you've learned from abdominal breathing and diaphragmatic breathing of regulating your breathing, loosening your stomach muscles. So therefore, your muscles around your body, you're relaxing them so that you deal with the emotional impact of the rumination first. Then, as soon as you've got that done, which you can do in minutes, you then go to the mind. Now, some people will say, I don't want to do it that way. I want to go to the mind directly. Fine, go to the mind directly. What that means is you use your skills of telling the mind what to think about, and you change the channel away from the stuff that's unpleasant, and you put on something special that you have reserved. You've got it in a compartment. This is your go-to thought when you want something really fun to think about to get you out of any mood, and you go into that box, and maybe eventually you start numbering the little boxes, and you go to number 3. And number 3 is you doing a slow dance with a partner to your favorite song in a beautiful room that's sort of dimly lit and has nice, I'm just making this up. You can make up anything you want, whatever it is. You go to that compartment, you pull out that story, you put that story on your mind, you get that your mind thinking about that beautiful picture, and then you go to the anxiety and do the breathing, if you prefer that way. The other way, you go to the breathing first, and then you go to the mind, select that beautiful story. The combination of those two tools will get the job done. You will both deal with the emotional aspect by regulating the breathing and loosening muscles. I want to add that. But you'll also go to the cognitive part, those negative thoughts, and you will change the channel to the channel that you want in order to make your day and create the feelings that you want and no longer feel like a victim. And that's a lot of what my teaching is about. Taking your word, David, agency, and getting out of this victim mentality that I am the object of my mind, that I can't stop my anxiety, and completely flip it around with these very easy tools. And it's no surprise to me that we've come upon these tools that are easy. It's no surprise at all. And I'm delighted to have them. And I'm really happy that you asked, and I have an opportunity to share them with people because they're easy to practice. It does take perseverance. I mean, we have to be clear about that. In order to direct your mind 30 seconds a day, 5 times a day, and keep it up every day, it's going to take a little perseverance. But I'm not asking people to shove bamboo under their nails. I'm not asking people to get down and do 20 push-ups. This isn't like strenuous. It's just something, yeah. And the same with the abdominal and the diaphragmatic breathing. It's not strenuous. It's not something you have to be a certain kind of person to do. Every single person that's listening to us, David, can do these 2 exercises, and there's no box top to send in, and no money to send in, and nobody to pay, and nothing sneaky, and nothing you got to eat, nothing you got to drink. You just have to practice 30 seconds, 5, 6 times a day on the 2 exercises, and you'll change your life. If you do this for up to, it might take some of you 6, 9 months, but if you do this regularly and keep it up and you don't change your life, you can find me on the internet. Call me up and complain and say you fooled me, but I'm not fooling you.
This is tremendous. Thank you for those 2 tools. Thank you for that super useful information. And to me, the worst position I'm ever in is when I feel like I'm a victim, that I'm powerless. And I really push back against that. I want to take a few minutes at the end of the program here, and I want to talk to you about this book that you're working on, Psychedelic Medicine at the End of Life. What are you up to there?
Thanks, David. It's an important book because our culture for thousands of years now, has instilled in us a fear of dying. And instead of teaching us that we are born, we live a life, and we die, and that's just part of life, and the best thing that we can do is celebrate the very fact that we got to be here. Just getting the life in and of itself is worthy of celebration, even if you got dealt a lousy hand, because the hand still gives you an opportunity to experience life. Even if it's being experienced in a difficult way, it's still life. Think of the alternative, non-being. It means nothing. But we're not taught that. We're taught to fear the end. And to make it worse, the great religions of the world teach that depending on how you live this life, that will decide where you go next, because there's a next. And that next is either a beautiful place or a really bad place. Now, who's going to go where? The religions teach us the good people go up to heaven, and the people who have sinned go to this other place called hell. Well, every one of us has sinned because we're humans. We've all done something that we're not proud of. We've all done something that we wish we didn't do. And so when the time comes to transition to do what we call dying, very few of us say, "Oh, I've been such a great person, I'm sure I'm going to heaven." There's always a little fear in everybody. God's watching and he's very strict, and I'm going down for that. You never know. So everybody has a little fear of dying. Very sad and very unfortunate. But now we've come upon these medicines called psychedelic, and they very much appear to be useful in helping people with end-of-life fear, anxiety, and depression. And so that's what the book is about. It's about my interviewing some of the greatest scientists in the world who are doing research with psychedelics with people at the end of life, very often people suffering from terminal cancer. And so that's what the book is about. But it's also a book about perhaps it's time to rethink our views of dying. Perhaps it's time to look at it from a different perspective rather than a fear victim perspective, to look at it as a time of celebration that we were lucky enough to get this experience. And so what I'm advocating for in the book, David, is that before we die, we throw a celebration party and we attend our own goodbye party and we skip the funeral because we're in a box anyway. We skip this whole thing of all our friends dressing in black and walking around somber or maybe drinking. We skip that whole thing. And instead, we have a regular party like we humans do in our little tribes. We have food and we have dancing and we have hugging and people being nice to each other. And then we go around the person who's dying and personally says goodbye to each person at the party and says it's been wonderful being in life with you. And if there's another place, maybe I'll see you there. But if there isn't, this has been a wonderful trip and I'm lucky to have had it. Bye-bye. So that's a different way of looking at life. So that's a second little part of the book. But most of the book is bringing forth the scientific evidence of the potential of psychedelics for healing anxiety, depression, and fear of dying.
Can I ask you to make a speculation?
Sure. What on? Not the stock market.
If I'm not going to heaven or hell, what happens to me?
You know, one of my fun jokes in this world, David, is when I go into a store or a restaurant and a person says to me, "Do you have any questions?" We've all heard that, right? Do you have any questions? And when I'm in an impish mood, I always give them the same answer. Of course I have questions, the same old questions. Where did I come from and where do I go next? The eternal questions. Those are the two questions that, for those of us who like to think about such things, make life extra interesting, because we know that we're never going to be able to figure out where we came from or where we go next. Because no matter what you come up with for an answer, somebody's going to say, but what was before that, or what comes after that? So it's forever. It's infinitum.
Just had to ask.
Of course. As I said, I love the question. It gives me, I get to be the imp.
This has been wonderful. Richard, thank you for your time today. I know you're a busy guy. We will put some links down in the show notes, and I encourage everyone to go to your Instagram page.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Take care, Richard.
Bye-bye.